Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Mark never imagined his life would change so much when his parents decided to leave the city where he grew up. At the time, he had no choice but to go along with his family's decision, but the move was a shock. He was used to his old neighborhood, the same streets, his childhood friends, the comfort of knowing where everything was. Suddenly, all of that was taken away and replaced by a whole new environment, completely different from what he knew. The city they moved to was bigger, busier, and full of people from different backgrounds. The first thing that caught his eye was the large community of Dutch descendants who lived there. He had never been around that culture before and initially felt out of place. The last names, the customs, even how some families spoke Dutch among themselves seemed like another world. But there was something fascinating about it. Little by little, Mark began to see that this city was a mix of stories, traditions, and dreams of people who, just like him, were trying to find their place there. School was one of the biggest challenges. He wasn't really shy, but being the new kid is never easy. On his first day, he felt all eyes on him as soon as he walked into the classroom. Some kids were welcoming, others acted like he wasn't there. The cliques were already formed, and he didn't fit into any of them. It went on like that for a few weeks, until one day in PE class, a soccer match changed everything. Mark had always been good with the ball, and he showed it that day. One of the popular boys noticed his skills and asked him to join the team. That was his first step toward fitting in, and from then on, he started making friends. As the years passed, that city began to feel like home. At first, he thought he would eventually go back to the place where he grew up, but that idea gradually faded. He finished school and, instead of going off in search of new horizons, he decided to stay. Not just because his family was there, but because he couldn't picture himself anywhere else. He wanted to build his future right there. He started working as a truck driver. It wasn't glamorous, but it was an honest job, and he liked the sense of independence it gave him. He spent hours on the road, discovering new places, seeing the city from angles that few people noticed. He learned a lot during that period, about responsibility, about patience, and about how to deal with different types of people. But he didn't want to spend his whole life behind the wheel. He knew he could do more. Over time, he got interested in business. He looked at the companies he was delivering goods for and wondered what it was like to be on the other side, in charge, making decisions. His curiosity led him to learn more about it, to watch how the operations worked, to talk to people who had been in the business for years. He was smart and determined. Little by little, he started making moves toward that new path, looking for opportunities, learning by doing. That was when he met Lisa. She wasn't like the other women he had dated. There was something about her that intrigued him. Maybe it was her confidence, her intelligence, or just how she seemed to know exactly what she wanted out of life. Their relationship moved quickly, like it was already meant to be. Mark's family welcomed Lisa, except for one thing: his mother wasn't exactly thrilled. In her eyes, something couldn't be overlooked: Lisa didn't have Italian heritage. It shouldn't have mattered, but to his mother, who really valued traditions and roots, it was a mild disappointment. Even so, it wasn't a real obstacle. Mark wasn't about to let his mother's opinion stand in the way of his happiness. Marriage was a new chapter. Mark's life, which had already gone through a lot of changes, was now taking a different direction. He was building something of his own with his wife, and soon his family grew. 2 kids arrived, bringing new dynamics, new challenges, and new responsibilities. But along with all of that came the start of a shift he didn't notice right away. Becoming a father brought Mark an indescribable joy. Being a dad was life-changing. He loved watching the little ones take their first steps, learn new words, and explore the world with curious eyes. But at the same time, their daily routine totally changed. Sleepless nights, constant worries, and the weight of added responsibilities. He and Lisa spent less time as a couple and more time as teammates in childcare. Lisa, always decisive, quickly made her stance clear: 2 kids were enough. For her, the family was complete. She went further. She suggested, or rather insisted, that Mark get a vasectomy. At first, he hesitated. Not because he wanted more kids at that moment, but because the idea of making such a final decision bothered him. Even so, Lisa didn't see a reason to drag out the conversation. She wanted to close that chapter in their lives. Mark went along with it. He believed it was the right thing to do. But somewhere inside, a little seed of discomfort took root, a quiet feeling that maybe he was giving up something without really realizing it. Time passed, and with the kids a bit older, Lisa began to show a growing desire to return to work. At first, Mark was all for it. He understood that she needed to feel productive, to focus on something besides housework. Then she got a job at a big company, which visibly energized her. The first few months seemed balanced. Lisa organized her schedule so she could be at home, and Mark got used to the new routine. But things soon changed. Overtime hours came up. At first just every now and then, but then they became frequent. The job, which had once seemed like a way to supplement their life, started taking over more space than it should. And along with all that, one name started to come up more often: Brandon. Brandon was Lisa's immediate supervisor. Mark didn't know much about him, only that he and Lisa had gone to school together years ago. They were close, part of the same circles, shared the same activities. At first, Mark didn't give it much thought. He got that co-workers naturally spent time together, that it was normal to have friends from work. But over time, he couldn't ignore a growing discomfort. Lisa talked about Brandon with a familiarity that was different. Little comments, inside jokes, details that didn't sound like things you'd say about someone who was just your boss. Plus, she started mentioning him in conversations that had nothing to do with work. Brandon said this, Brandon suggested that. It didn't seem fishy in itself, but hearing his name so often made Mark uneasy. A real red flag popped up when Mark discovered, by chance, that Lisa was going out for informal get-togethers with coworkers after hours. Small happy hours, quick dinners. Lisa never mentioned these outings beforehand. Mark only heard about them later, as if they weren't a big deal. But what really stood out was that Brandon was almost always there. Then, on a random day, he found a message on Lisa's phone. It wasn't explicit or romantic, but something about it made his stomach tighten. A joke, a certain intimacy, something hinting at a closeness he wasn't comfortable with. He decided to address it, calmly asking, "Do you think you're spending too much time with Brandon?" Lisa laughed. "What kind of question is that?" "He's my boss, Mark. We work together. It's totally normal." Mark crossed his arms, took a deep breath. "You never tell me about these after-work hangouts. I always end up hearing about them by accident. Because they're nothing important. It's just co-workers grabbing dinner." Her voice sounded light, but something about how she wouldn't meet his gaze made Mark's chest tighten. He didn't want to be some controlling husband or come across as paranoid, but he felt deep down that she wasn't being totally honest. He tried to shake off the worry, telling himself he was just overreacting, that Lisa would never do anything to hurt him. But the doubt had already taken root in his mind, and every new overtime session, every coworker hangout, every mention of Brandon only made that doubt grow. Until, one day, Lisa said something that made everything crumble. "I'm going on a company trip for a seminar. 3 days." Mark nodded, acting casual. "Who else is going?" She listed a few co-workers, and there, in the middle of the names, he appeared, Brandon. It felt like ice water had been dumped on Mark. He tried to hide his reaction, but he couldn't help tensing up. Lisa caught on. "What's your problem now?" "Nothing. I just think it's interesting how this seminar means even more extra time with your boss." She rolled her eyes. "Mark, seriously. There's nothing weird about it. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But in that moment, something inside him broke. He wasn't sure if it was his trust, his patience, or just his fear of being right about something he didn't want to face. What he did know was that, from that moment on, he couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. In the days after that talk, Mark was plagued by a sense of dread. He tried telling himself he was only imagining things, that he had no solid proof to doubt Lisa. But the real issue was that even without hard evidence, part of him could no longer ignore the signs. He noticed small shifts in Lisa's behavior. She started placing her phone face down on the table, something she never used to do. Their conversations became shorter, more superficial, like she was always in a hurry, too busy for anything beyond the bare minimum. Then, the week of the seminar, one thing really hit him: she seemed excited. It wasn't the excitement of someone fulfilled at work, but a different sparkle in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in a long time, and it definitely wasn't directed at him. The night before the trip, Mark watched Lisa pack. Each piece of clothing was carefully folded, picked out with unusual attention. There was a new perfume on her dresser, a makeup kit he'd never seen before. Small things, quiet details, but to Mark they screamed a truth he wasn't ready to face. He wanted to ask again, press her, confront her more directly. But he was afraid that if he did, Lisa would pull even further away. So he just stayed silent as she wrapped up everything for those 3 days that, for some reason, mattered more to her than any other obligation. The next morning, Mark drove her to the airport. The ride was mostly quiet, with few words exchanged. Lisa showed no sign of discomfort, as if the situation was perfectly fine. Before stepping out of the car, she smiled and gave him a quick peck on the lips, so quick it felt meaningless. "Talk to you later," she said, grabbing her suitcase and disappearing among the other travelers. Mark stayed there for a moment, watching her walk away. Part of him still wanted to believe this was all in his head, that their marriage was strong, that he really did know the woman he married. But another part, a part growing stronger every day, told him something had been broken for a while. Those days dragged on. Lisa called him every night, but the conversations were lifeless. She said she was exhausted, that her days were full of meetings and sessions. There was no mention of Brandon, no stories of any funny incidents. It seemed like she was carefully picking what to share, leaving out anything that might seem suspicious. When she came back, Mark watched closely as she got off the plane. Lisa looked rested, not drained. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but that he felt deep in his gut. They went home, and Lisa slipped back into her routine as if nothing had happened. But now Mark was on high alert, and that's how he discovered something that changed everything. Late one night, after Lisa fell asleep, he picked up her phone. It was locked. He tried the usual passwords: her birthday, the kids' birthdays, her childhood home address. None worked. Lisa had never locked her phone before. It hit him hard. She was hiding something. The next day, while Lisa was showering, Mark grabbed her phone again. The screen was unlocked. His heart pounded. He scrolled through it quickly, checking messages, looking at notifications. Then he found it. A chat with Brandon. There wasn't anything obviously romantic or explicit. But the tone felt intimate. Jokes, innuendos, late-night messages. Little pieces that, separately, might be harmless, but together painted a picture Mark didn't want to see. His blood boiled. He dropped the phone on the table and left the house. He needed fresh air, needed time to think. When he came back, Lisa was in the living room, looking confused. "Where'd you go?" Mark looked at her. Part of him wanted to throw the phone in her face and demand answers. But right then, he realized something: Lisa was smart. Without undeniable proof, she'd just deny it all. She'd flip the script and say he was imagining things, that he was being paranoid. So he took a deep breath and forced a little smile. Just needed to clear my head. Lisa didn't seem suspicious. At least, not then. But Mark already knew. And from that point on, he watched every detail, every move, every expression she made. Because now he wanted to catch the truth without a shred of doubt. Time went by, but Mark's questions never went away. He no longer saw Lisa the same way. Every word sounded calculated, every smile looked fake. Their marriage was quietly falling apart, but Lisa pretended nothing was wrong. Mark decided he wouldn't confront her unless he had something she couldn't deny. He knew that picking a fight without proof would only make him seem paranoid. Lisa was clever, always good at arguing, and if he had nothing concrete, she'd blame him for starting problems that supposedly didn't exist. The perfect chance showed up at her company's Christmas party. She brought it up casually, as if it were no big deal, just a small dinner, some celebrations with her co-workers. But Mark noticed a detail. Unlike in previous years, this time she seemed hesitant to invite him. "You can come if you want, but it's really just for the work crowd," Lisa said, fiddling with her hair and avoiding eye contact. Mark simply smiled and said calmly, "Sure, sounds like fun. I'll go." Lisa looked uncomfortable. And that's when Mark knew he was about to uncover the truth. On the party night, Lisa spent more time than usual getting ready. A new dress, perfect makeup, a perfume he'd never smelled before. Mark noted every detail in silence. When they arrived, Lisa immediately blended in with her co-workers. Mark hung back, greeting some people, but always keeping an eye on her. He saw how much Lisa smiled when she talked to Brandon, how she casually touched his arm, how they seemed to share a different kind of connection than with everyone else. As the night went on, Mark noticed Lisa and Brandon slipping away to a quieter spot. His heart pounded. He waited a few minutes before following, trying not to make it obvious. He walked through the hallways, hoping to catch a bit of their conversation. Then, rounding a corner, he saw them. Lisa was leaning back against the wall, and Brandon was standing very close to her, closer than a coworker should be. Mark couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way Lisa bit her lip, the way Brandon looked at her, the slight touch of their hands on each other's arms, it was all he needed to see. His world froze. He wanted to jump in, shout, demand explanations. But instead, he forced himself to stay put. He took a deep breath and walked away before he did something he'd regret. That night, he stayed silent. They went home in silence, Lisa acting like nothing had happened. But to Mark, it was all crystal clear. From that moment on, he no longer saw Lisa as his wife. She was just someone he needed to learn to let go of. After the Christmas party, Mark and Lisa started living like strangers under the same roof. He never brought up what he'd seen that night, but he changed completely toward her. Their conversations became superficial, dinners were quiet, and any remaining affection dried up. Lisa noticed he was pulling away but didn't try to fix it. In fact, she seemed fine with the coldness. Mark knew she was still talking to Brandon, still exchanging messages, still going to those so-called work events. But instead of wasting energy making Lisa admit the truth, he started preparing to leave. Their marriage was finished. All he had to do was make it official. The next few months were a test of endurance. Neither of them wanted to be the first to talk about divorce, like they were waiting for something big that would make the decision unavoidable. That moment came on an otherwise ordinary day, no fights, no yelling, no dramatic revelations. They were in the kitchen, quiet, each focused on some routine chore. Suddenly, Mark looked at her and, for the first time, felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no sadness. Just indifference. He took a deep breath and broke the silence. "I want a divorce." Lisa stopped what she was doing. Time seemed to slow for a second. She didn't look surprised, as if she knew this would happen eventually. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes," Mark said firmly. She was quiet for a few seconds, then just nodded. "All right." That was it. No drama, no pushback. As if, deep down, they both knew the marriage had ended long ago. The process was quick. Lisa didn't bother fighting for anything beyond what was fairly hers. They split their property, sorted out arrangements for the kids, and signed the papers without looking back. Then one day, Mark woke up in an empty house, without Lisa's constant presence, without that lingering weight of a relationship that had hurt him for so long. He was free. The following months were all about rebuilding. He poured himself into his work, spent time with his kids, reconnected with friends he'd neglected during the tense years of his marriage. He shaped a new routine, a new way of living. And for the first time in a while, he felt at peace. Mark no longer thought of Lisa as a painful memory. The divorce was a relief, a moment to breathe after years of emotional strain. He rebuilt his life carefully, focusing on what mattered most: his kids, his job, his peace. But life has a way of testing those who think they've already moved on. Out of nowhere came a wedding invitation from a mutual friend, and Mark didn't hesitate to accept. He knew Lisa would be there, but it didn't matter. Their marriage was over, or so he believed. When he walked into the venue, he noticed people's stares. Some greeted him awkwardly, like they knew something he didn't. It felt strange, but he shrugged it off. Then he saw her. Lisa, elegantly dressed, holding Brandon's hand. Initially, Mark felt only indifference. But as he watched, he noticed she was being over the top, laughing too hard, clinging to Brandon, tossing glances in Mark's direction now and then. She wanted some kind of reaction. And it didn't take long for him to find out why. A longtime friend quietly pulled him aside and said, "Man, I need to tell you something. Lisa's up to something. She told a few people she wants to push you until you snap. She said this wedding is the perfect chance to humiliate you in front of everyone." Mark blinked, taking it in. "What do you mean?" "She said she's going to lay it all out for everyone. Not sure exactly how, but from the way she's acting, she wants to force you to blow up so she can play the victim afterward." Mark glanced over. Lisa was chatting in a lively circle, but she kept casting quick looks his way, like she was sizing him up. That's when he understood. She wanted a public fight. She wanted to corner him in front of everyone, maybe twist the story however she wanted. If he fell for it, she'd get to be the poor woman who just moved on, while he'd be the bitter ex who couldn't handle the breakup. It was a low move. But Mark was done with that game. He took a deep breath and made a choice. He joined a small group of friends, spoke loudly enough to be heard, and said, "It's funny how some people try to relive the past when they're no longer part of our future." A few people laughed, some looked over at Lisa. She realized her plan had collapsed. Mark finished his drink, set the glass down, and left the wedding before she had any chance to do whatever she'd been plotting. That night, Lisa lost her stage, her audience, her sense of control. And Mark? Mark went home knowing that for the first time in a long while, he had won. Mark left that wedding feeling something he hadn't experienced in ages: relief. For the first time, he saw that Lisa couldn't hurt him anymore. She tried to stir up drama, embarrass him, push him to react. But she failed. Driving through the city's lights that calm evening, he realized he no longer felt anger or resentment. All of that had stayed behind with the years he'd wasted trying to salvage something that was never meant to last. In the months that followed, Mark rediscovered pleasure in life's simplest things. He started traveling more, hanging out with the friends he'd distanced himself from, growing even closer to his kids. But he still didn't expect one thing: the possibility of falling in love again. Rachel was someone who'd been around for a long time, but he'd never looked at her romantically. They'd known each other since he was married, she'd always been respectful and low-key. They worked in the same field, occasionally chatting about business, family, day-to-day things, nothing more. Over time, though, their conversations got more frequent. They started laughing more genuinely together. Mark noticed he felt at ease around her, like he didn't need to pretend, like he wasn't walking on eggshells. Then, one day, everything shifted. They were sitting in a cafe, talking as usual. It was just a normal afternoon with no special expectations. Rachel was telling him about a trip she wanted to take with her daughter, and Mark was enjoying how excited she sounded. Then she stopped. She went silent for a second, watching him with a different look in her eyes. "What is it?" Mark asked, smiling. Rachel hesitated, like she was deciding whether or not to say what she was thinking. "You seem lighter," she finally said. Mark frowned a little. "Lighter?" She nodded, resting her elbow on the table and looking right at him. "Yeah. You used to carry such a burden on your shoulders. Like you were always tense, stuck on something. Now, you seem like you let it go." Mark stayed quiet. Because she was right. He wasn't the same man who spent years trying to fix a failed marriage. He wasn't the man tortured by suspicion and worry. He wasn't stuck looking backward, searching for answers he'd never get. He'd simply moved on. That was when he realized something. Rachel wasn't just a friend. And maybe, just maybe, she was who he was meant to be with. Time naturally brought them together. There was no rush or urgency. Things just happened. Casual meetups led to family outings. They shared a genuine affection, no games, no hidden motives. Then, one day, Mark held her hand and knew he didn't need to search any further. Rachel showed him love doesn't need big drama to be real. They got married a few years later, without a huge celebration, just the kids, their closest friends, and the certainty that they were finally where they belonged. Lisa, of course, heard about the wedding. Mark heard rumors that she tried to mock his new relationship and made a few snide remarks. But it no longer mattered. He had something Lisa could never take, peace. And in the end, that was the biggest lesson Mark learned. Some fights don't require shouting, arguing, or revenge to be won. Sometimes, winning is just moving on. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.